everyone to the IAPP web conference, Managing Privacy in the Era of Generative AI, sponsored today by Securiti. My name is Jordan Hardy, Programming and Speaker Specialist here at the IAPP, and I'll be your platform host for today's program. We'll be getting started with the presentation in just a minute, but before we do, a few program details. Participating in today's web conference will automatically provide IAPP certified privacy professionals who are the named registrants with 1 CPE credit. I also want to let you know that a recording of this program will be available in your My IAPP, My Purchases, My Recordings portal within 48 hours. So you technically didn't purchase this, but if you go ahead and go to your My IAPP portal, hit the title of the webcon, you'll then see the recording and the slides underneath that you can download within about 2 business days. Please feel free to post any questions you have for the panelists in the Q&A area specifically at the bottom of the screen, and then we do have a designated Q&A portion at the end of this program that they will try to answer as many as they can. And now on to our program, and I'd like to introduce today's moderator, Jocelyn Houle, Senior Director of Product Management at Securiti. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jordan. It's great to be here. Welcome to our session, Managing Privacy in the Era of Generative AI. I'm Jocelyn Houle. I'll be your moderator, and I'm so excited to introduce our guest today, Jay Exum, Chief Privacy Officer at Asurion, Rehan Jalil, Founder and CEO of Securiti. I think you guys are going to have a great conversation today. Both of these panelists are incredible experts, but they also have incredible empathy for all of the privacy people and data stewards in this audience. So really looking forward to this conversation, and wanted to just say hi, Rehan. Hi, Jay.
Yeah. Hi, good morning.
Hey, Jay, can we just get started talking a little bit about Asurion? You're the Chief Trust and Privacy Officer, but we'd also just start with the company, maybe. What you do and kind of get a sense of the scope.
Sure. Many people will default to an understanding of Asurion they'll think of us as kind of a extended warranty company, and there is a piece of that it's our business, but the real business, we have over 300 million customers worldwide, and we think of our business as trying to make technology as accessible and usable as possible to people. As we all know, behind everything that looks simple, the technology, when it works properly, is like magic, lies a lot of complexity, and that makes it harder and harder for people to know which piece of the puzzle is breaking. So we try to make the delights of technology as accessible to people as possible, and our aim is to provide not just a repair, but service for just about anything you can imagine that plugs into your home.
That's amazing. Totally blown away by the scale of that with 300 million customers worldwide. I think that's close to the population of the US, so that's an incredible scale.
Yeah, it's a lot of people, and it makes our aspirational goals to be, we use the phrase remarkably human and actually helpful. At that scale is a real challenge, but we're proud of what we do.
Remarkably human, and what was the other part of it? Actually helpful. Actually helpful. I think this is what we'd like to see in Gen AI and LLMs. There's so much we want to do in this space, and that's really what we're going to be talking about. So we'd love to hear that perspective from privacy, but also the enablement. How are all the trust and privacy officers out there going to make this happen? So I'm really looking forward to that part of the conversation. Before we get there, though, I'm sure a lot of people on this call and on this webinar know a ton and could do a webinar on Gen AI. There's probably also people who are just coming to it new. It's come up so fast. There's so much material. I'm just wondering if we could just start with some level setting. Rehan, tell us what Gen AI is.
I think the way to think about AI has existed for quite some time. Why is this so different? AI has been used to find patterns in data to make decisions. Very useful. But for the very first time, we can see that AI has cracked the underlying mathematics in languages. So any language. And that's super powerful because humans are humans because we have command on language. We can communicate, we can write, we can read and learn from it and pass on to the generations. And now machines can, if they can do it, they can parse symbolic languages and they can understand and the concepts and generate new knowledge, new meaning out of it. That's new. And that's foundationally different as compared to traditionally what we actually have seen. And which means it has humongous opportunities to actually be super helpful, but at the same time, there are tons of issues and how to safely use this data with respect to privacy and security and governance. And more importantly, how do you trust? Because you're going to be trusting this generative AI. How do you actually can trust it? And what are the things that you need to put in place? The way I think about this audience here is fundamentally we're all enablers for Gen AI, because if you don't crack that, we're going to put all kinds of locks on it. It could be super beneficial for humanity if we can figure out how to make it safe. So we're all trying to be enablers for it.
Interesting. Jay, let me ask you this real quick. Among your peers, and when you're working, across industry, because I know that you speak at other events, what's the mood? Are people feeling more worried, more excited about the opportunity?
I think that actually runs right into why this is such an appropriate conversation for an IAPP conference, and why generative AI, although it is not purely a privacy matter, seems to be landing over and over again on chief privacy officers' desks as something to deal with. And what it reminds me a great deal of, honestly, is the run-up to the GDPR, when the world was having to worry about its data and how it's being used at a granular level that was completely new. So it's a familiar sort of challenge. We know that this is coming, that it is big and it is inevitable. And we know that we're working without a perfect roadmap for exactly what it is that we're supposed to do. But I think a lot of the reason that there's so much interested in this at the IAPP and among people in roles like mine is that we've been working hard at trying to solve data problems that don't have clear paths to an obvious solution for a very long time. And generative AI is a place where we can leverage all we've learned and had to worry about in privacy for a very long time. We'll talk a little bit later about the state of regulations and the things that we can learn from privacy laws, but it is familiar territory.
That's right. With privacy, the privacy people have had, this kind of very complex problem statement that is hard to solve before when, the first privacy requirements came out. And I often think, like, what advice would you give to yourself when you started the privacy journey, now that you're starting the Gen AI journey? Because the way we work with data has just exploded. And I think that's something you wanted to touch on as well, Rehan.
Yeah, I think the think about it is that it's a little different beast because Gen AI is neither just software, not just a data system. These models actually have highly compressed knowledge sitting inside them, but you don't know what it truly is. You cannot poke it that way. They're quite different. They're almost like a human mind. The model itself, if you feed the data, you cannot ask it to delete. You cannot delete very easily if the data actually goes into it, because it's going to sit in some kind of a combination of neural nets. Like if I told you a fact, I cannot ask you to forget it. Models are kind of like that. So you have to, the way you use them, they have to be quite different. And that's why it's important to make sure the data that's going into these models, that's not sensitive. And the way you're using it actually is different, which means all the controls and safety considerations around it, they have to be quite also differently treated. And hopefully we're going to cover that as part of this webinar.
Interesting. Yes.
In fact, what I will just add on to it is that there are fundamentally 4 areas, which we need to be thinking about if you want to enable the safe use of Gen AI. First is the models. This is a brand new construct. So the safety of the models itself and understanding what they can do, cannot do, how they utilize it actually is important. The data that goes into these models, having a full understanding of it, an inventory of it, and controls on it is going to be important. The safety of the prompt. Prompt means that how you're talking to, how you're enabling your users to communicate. Because these models understand natural language constructs, so how they can be actually attacked, misused, influenced, give it a name, and you have to be actually monitoring it. And what you will see that maybe perhaps we'll start with it, that regulations essentially are trying to cover these 3 areas, from the model safety, model understanding, to enterprise data usage, to prompt safety. And maybe we'll start perhaps thinking about what regulation is trying to do, and then maybe covered in depth of these three areas.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Jay, we have been talking a little bit about what I know it's an uncertain picture today. If you think about like, who are the regulators going to be, what types of regulation timelines? I know there's a lot of uncertainty here, but like, how are you thinking about the regulation requirements that are going to come certainly in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I know we've got a few slides later on some of the proposed AI regulations, but I think we need to start by recognizing that none of these things is a law just yet, and even when they become laws, number one, they're going to be playing catch up, and number two, there will, in most cases, there's going to be at least a couple of years before they actually become laws. So I think we need to think about the kinds of things, and we actually had a statement at the IAPP summit from the FTC saying, hey, don't be fooled, just because there's not something called the AI regulation doesn't mean that AI isn't regulated. It is. The FTC still expects us to protect individual customers, which, as it happens, is also the aim of comprehensive privacy laws.
Actually, I have a quick question about that, because I do, not to interrupt you, but like, it used to be, and I come from the finance background, that you would wait for regulators to give you an order, a policy would come out, but that's not the case anymore, right? You have to watch what they're doing and be proactive. Do I have that right?
When something is coming this big and this fast and is this complex, if you wait until the regulators have sorted it out, two things happen. Number one, you're going to be too late, and number two, you're going to miss an opportunity to be part of the conversation. And when, just as was the case with big, difficult, comprehensive privacy laws, there are situations in which 100% literal compliance is somewhere between difficult and impossible, and anticipating exactly the way the laws are going to evolve and be shaped can't really be done. And part of what our obligation here is to say, what kind of story do we want to tell about what kind of company we are and how we're thinking about individuals? If we make a mistake, is that a mistake that's made in good faith, or was it a mistake that reflects a lack of attention to the things that we need to do? And I think in order to tell the right sort of story from a compliance standpoint, it is more important than ever that you have as close to a real-time understanding of all of your data and what you're doing with it. That applies certainly outside the boundaries of privacy, but there's no way to comply with your obligations under existing privacy laws about notice, consent, transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, if you don't have a handle on your data and where it's going and how it's being used that you really trust. And it is no longer feasible in the way that we did back in sort of comprehensive privacy 1.0 to try to do that by repeated surveys over and over again. You've got to have a better way to get to that information.
So like new problems and new tools are required. And then the kind of two themes I'm hearing are there's, legal considerations and operational considerations that have to come early in the process.
And reputational as well. What does ethical look like? And if you do that well, then you gain a voice in determining what those regulations might look like as consensus develops around those things.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And there's a lot of conversations going on around regulation. So we don't know who's going to regulate, but we do know a little bit about who probably is going to regulate this and some of the proposals. Now, maybe you can help me think about this. If I was a chief privacy officer for seeing this, I would be like, when I take this information, what should I do with this? Should I read through it all? Should I start familiarizing myself, put together a working group? When you see this, how do you read this kind of chart?
So I do two things. I didn't put together this chart, but I recommend it to our attendees. It's really, really useful because what this is doing is talking about some of the ideas that are floating around in, for example, the NIST AI framework and the EU AI Act and some of the other items we've listed, and connecting it to laws we have now. You see the GDPR and PIPEDA are specifically referenced on this page. So I put it through the filter of how does this intersect with the things I already have to worry about from a privacy standpoint. And I think about that first because I have those obligations today. And then I try to keep up with key frameworks like the NIST framework as they develop to kind of frame our thinking in ways that it has impacts beyond privacy and the way it influences our thinking about privacy. And so this kind of cross-reference is quite helpful.
Good. I'm really glad to hear that. We've got a few of these slides across, different topics like governance, DSAR, which we'll share afterwards. And I think what I'm hearing from you, it's never too early to start doing your homework in this space to address some of these oncoming regulatory risks that were part of Rehan's kind of 4 pillars that you put out there, right? There's regulatory risk, and it's got a lot of heartburn built into it, right? Because we don't know who's going to regulate it, we don't know the degree, but we do know some things, and we can get started with it. So I really appreciate that point of view.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of how you can make it too late for yourself there are companies who had big GDPR exposure had to do a lot of this work, in thinking about their data to get ready for that. Companies in the US who had a lesser exposure to the GDPR were a little bit behind. And then when the CCPA kind of came out of nowhere, all of a sudden they were having to scramble to catch up to what companies who had more GDPR exposure had been having to think about for years. The time to think about generative AI is today, and privacy is an excellent lens through which to begin thinking about it.
That's such a great thing. I think it's great to get some examples. So we talked a little bit about the regulatory risk on the technical and like the Gen AI LLM structure. Rehan, I think the models have some risk, and then there's a data risk. Can you help us kind of pull that apart?
Yeah, absolutely. I think maybe I'll just highlight for the audience that we will share these slides, and of course you will see that within the slides, within the regulatory sides, there'll be some, and there's a white paper that you can download, which will actually have mappings from the regulatory side, where it's the governance on the AI classification systems, the logic audit, the mapping of the systems. There are requirements from the governance side. There are requirements being considered from the disclosure side of things, like what kind of AI systems are being used. Similarly, in the category of DSR, I think there are specifically requirements there for the use of the Gen AI. Same for consent, assessments, and security safeguards. We'll share these slides, and there's a white paper associated with it. But what you will see is that they map into those areas: the use of data, the use of model, and the prompt safety. At the end, it actually is
all the
about
things
those
we're going to cover. I just wanted to just quickly, I'll give you a softball question, which is, you really we've been focused on creating this as a guide for all the privacy professionals out there to start reading, to start connecting the dots. And at the same time, you're a big Gen AI supporter, and you've been working with AI for years. I think those two things go together. Like, why did you create this report right now?
Yeah, I think because the adoption of the Gen AI, this is a driver that we're seeing is coming straight from the boards and the CEOs, because they see the benefit of it to the enterprises and to their customers is going to be there. So adoption, the intent to adopt is humongous because of the benefits that it entails. At the same time, clearly new kinds of threats and new kinds of security issues are there. That's why I think it's good to actually put it out there. Whether you may be thinking through the lens of the regulation that we got to do it, but we're going to talk about why actually logically makes sense to do it. Logically, your company is going to be safer, your audience is going to be safer, your data is going to be safer. Even if the regulations didn't exist, you would want to logically do that, because inherently security and privacy risks are there.
And from a privacy perspective, people will be safer. That's the core focus of privacy, and that's going to be the core focus of AI. What keeps people safe.
Great point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So all this pressure is going to kind of come in come into these privacy offices. The pressure to get out in front to do revenue capture with Gen AI, but then there's the equally strong pressure to protect people that you guys have been committed to.
Yeah, you asked me a question about the models, right? So models, we may be thinking right now that maybe one or two, because ChatGPT comes to mind when you talk about models. The reality is there are going to be dozens and maybe many dozens of them in the enterprise. Your developers are going to pick up on it, whatever makes sense. They're going to test it. They're going to send data to multiple models to see, what one works, which one for which use case is going to work. So discovery of the models and inventory of what data is going to what models is important. And open source, there's so many models sitting on Hugging Face and other places. Your developers, teams are going to